I've been in my new home for just over a year now, and as it's a Queenslander style cottage that's probably around about 80 years old, there have been an enormous number of projects that have needed doing. One of them has been really easy to ignore because I can literally just close the doors on it. That's the Euro style laundry. It is an absolute disaster area, but the time has now come for me to seek some inspiration and to get out and do something about it. My local Bunnings has a huge caboodle display section, and pretty much all of the caboodle gear is usable in the laundry, not just the kitchen. You can design online, in-store by yourself, or with a design specialist. Then you just grab what you need straight off the shelf and you're on your way. Once my design's sorted, it's time for the strip out and prep. Whenever you're doing a job like this, make sure you know exactly where your water meter and electricity switchboard are so you can quickly shut things down if needs be. The sink waste pipe just unscrews, and keep a bucket handy for the spillage because there will be some. The water's all easily turned off and disconnected as they're independent taps on the back wall. In this case, the back lip of the sink is under the tiles, so I can't remove the sink unit until I get the tiles off. If your home was built prior to the late 1980s, then chances are you're going to have some products in there that contain asbestos. Asbestos was often used in wall sheeting for wet areas like bathrooms and laundries. Now, I know I've got asbestos in my home, but I know the laundry's safe because it's only about 15 years of age. If you for a second think you've got asbestos in any part of your home that you're working on, don't just think. You need to call in the experts and get some advice on how you can continue safely with your project. First cutting at the back of the sink to break the silicone seal, and then I'm using a rubber mallet and a wide rigid scraper to try to get behind the tiles. In some cases you'll find the tiles lift off easily when done this way, especially if the walls are fibre cement sheet. Even if they don't come off easily, this technique will minimise damage to the plasterboard. The tiles proved very stubborn, so they needed a touch of percussive encouragement before I was able to break them away bit by bit. Always wear gloves and safety glasses when doing this sort of stuff. Once they're off the wall, just use a utility knife to tidy the area up and roughly trim it to shape. Getting the washing machine out, and I've put an old towel on my trolley so I don't damage the side of the machine. Oh, and don't forget to disconnect the water hose. The sink and tub stand can now be easily moved out of the way. When I pulled the old tubs out, I found that they'd left a couple of tiles out from the tile skirting. This was so that they could fit their tub unit flush up against the wall. It's not going to cause a problem for me because my cabinet unit's 600 wide, it'll completely conceal it, and I can adjust the position to accommodate it. Now, in fact, it's a good thing for me because it lets me get a good look at the waterproofing. Now I know the waterproofing in the area is up to standard, so it's something I don't have to worry about. Now I'll repair my plasterboard. You only need simple ready-mixed products in small tubs for this, and yes, you can buy repair-sized mini sheets of plasterboard. Use a level as a straight edge and a sharp utility knife to trim up that broken plasterboard to a nice even shape so you can measure it. While the cavity is exposed, mark on the wall the position of the studs to make it easier to find your fix-off points further down the track. Take an accurate measurement of that tidied up hole and then transpose those measurements to your sheet of plasterboard. Using a large builder's square will help to keep your measurements and mark out accurate. Along the marked line, use your level as a straight edge and then score the board with your utility knife. Always try to cut away from you or stand to the side of the cutting line. Now for the long length of the board, continue that score all the way to the far end. Lift the board up and it will break neatly along that score, then use your knife to cut the paper on the other side. Check your cut board is the right fit before spreading some stud adhesive and pressing your board firmly into place. Secure with a few needle tip screws and then tidy any remaining messy edges with your utility knife and bladed scraper before adding the joint tape. I prefer this self-adhesive jointing tape because unlike the old school plaster tape, you don't actually have to bed it into plaster and then hold it in place with plaster. You just apply it to the wall, it self-adheres, and then you put your layer of base coat over the top. Cover all the joins with tape and you can fold a bit to go into the corner. Then apply a base coat over the top of the tape, pressing it firmly into the joints to fill all those gaps.
In my case, this large patch won't be visible as it'll be behind the tiles. For areas that will be visible, you apply the base coat and once dry, sand it back, apply a top or finishing coat, and then once dry, sand that back to a smooth finish. Tidy up any spots and holes on the wall with a razor scraper and fill with a suitable filler or finishing coat. Then let that set. While you're waiting for that to dry, it's the perfect time to start assembling cabinets. I love this tape-free packaging. It totally reduces the risk of panel damage when you're unpacking, and it reduces the amount of non-recyclable waste. All of the necessary bits for each module will be in the box. That includes the legs if you're assembling base cabinets. Make sure you check everything's there and put them aside so they'll be safe. Start your assembly with the base panel. It's easy to spot with the pre-drilled holes for the leg mounting plates. They go underneath and the finished edge goes at the front. Put a line of quality adhesive, one that will dry clear, at the bottom edge of the back panel, and with your drill set to screw and running on low speed, drive in the screws, ensuring you do not overdrive. Repeat for both side panels and then add the bridging joiner across the top at the front. Cut a piece of cardboard to the size of your cabinet base and the back if needed to create a template, and in situ mark where you need holes for pipes and then transfer this onto your cabinet. Use a hole saw that's larger than the pipes and fittings to drill holes where needed. You can now attach and adjust your cabinet legs. Position the base cabinet and use a small level to check it is sitting level both side to side and front to back, adjusting the legs as needed. Fit a combo pre-drill and countersink bit to your drill and add at least 2 points on the side and rear pre-drill into a wall stud, and then use a screw at least 50mm long to secure.
A really common question is how long does a screw need to be when holding timber to timber? The simple answer is that it should be in the timber as deep as the timber is thick that you're holding in place. So if you're holding 20mm in place, you want 20mm into the timber at least. Now, an important thing here is that if you're going through plasterboard as part of the fixing process, don't include the plasterboard thickness, generally 10mm, in the calculation of your screw holding or embedment length. So if it's 20mm of timber, you'll need 20mm plus 10mm of plasterboard, and then at least 20mm into the surface you're going to. So 50mm, not a 40mm screw.
I don't have a base cabinet to support the benchtop on the far side, so I need to add support rails. I've cut H3 65 by 18mm to length for the back, leaving an 18mm gap on the right for the side panel that will go on the cabinet. With a long level resting on the installed base cabinet as a guide, I pre-drill into that marked stud and into the corner too. The corner holes may need to be on an angle to hit the frame. Remove the rail, apply a generous amount of fast grab construction adhesive to the rear and then secure in place. I use 75mm white button head cabinet screws. Cut a rail for the side. It should be around 30mm shorter than the countertop will be, and don't forget to account for the thickness of the rail at the back. Then make a 45-degree cut on part of the bottom of the front edge so it won't be quite as conspicuous, and so that a protruding sharp corner won't be a hazard. Use that long level for alignment again, and then you can pre-drill and glue and screw in place. Now add the side panel to the outside face of the base cabinet, positioned so that at the front it is 18mm, the thickness of the door, proud of the actual cabinet side panel. Pre-drill and countersink, ensuring that you've set the depth of your countersink bit so you don't punch through the other side of the panel, and then fix the side panel in place with at least 6 evenly spaced screws. You can now sand down all those little spots that you plastered. Time to take accurate measurements for the bench top. Don't just measure at the back or the front, check both as there may be a variation.
Two things to bear in mind when you're cutting material like this. It's really heavy, so you don't want the cut end dropping off. If it does, it'll rip the bit that you're trying to retain. What you need to do is support each end. I've done that on 2 work platforms and then left a gap in the middle. And the other thing is the cleanest cut is always on the undersurface. So plan your cut so that what's underneath will in fact be the top of your bench top.
To keep your cut straight, clamp a level in place and use that as a saw guide. Once cut, it's time to work out where the sink is going. It needs to be on the side where the existing plumbing is, and I'm setting mine back 20mm from centre. You'll find there's a template in the sink box you can use, but rather than cutting that out and tracing around it, I found it easier to use the cardboard packer from the box to find my position. I then found the centre of the circle and used a metal ruler screwed in place to rotate around and mark the correct circumference. You can use the same technique with a tape measure hooked over the screw. Inside your cutout line, drill a hole with a bit large enough to allow your jigsaw blade to be positioned to start the cut. Now tape around the cutout using painter's masking tape. This is to avoid scratching the bench top as the jigsaw plate works over it. Fit your jigsaw with a blade that's the right length for the thickness of your bench top and make sure it's suitable for curved cuts. Firmly clamp your timber and start the cut through the drilled hole. I just used a medium speed setting to maintain control. Work carefully in one direction and don't force the saw into the wood, let it cut at its own speed. And a tip on curved cutting technique with a jigsaw, don't try and steer with the front of the tool, instead slide the back around to redirect the front. To keep my cutting path clean and visible, I just set my mini workshop blower up running on low to blow all the sawdust away as I cut. Adjust the position of your bench top on the stands as you work your way through the cut. You want the centre supported as you come towards the end of the cut so that it doesn't dramatically drop away, ripping the bench top or jamming your saw blade. Check the sink fit and perfect. Sand the sharp edge of the cut and any rough spots from the cut. Then use your sander to slightly round the front facing edges of the bench top too. Decide on the tap location and following the specifications in the box, use a hole saw to drill a suitable sized hole through the bench top. In the rear left corner, I'm also adding a 60mm hole, more on this later. As my hole saw was a little too shallow for the bench thickness, I started the hole from the top and then finished it from the bottom. As an extra precaution against water penetration, you can apply wet area silicone to the cut edges which may be exposed to water. Run a bead around and then use a flexible blade scraper to firmly push the silicone into the grain. Give the bench top a light sand with a fine sanding pad, wipe clean with a sugar soap wipe, prepare your paint or oil. I used Caboodle's clear hard wax oil, and then use a pad applicator to apply. Use long straight strokes going with the grain and ensure complete coverage. Don't forget the end grains and the edges. Both sides will need 2 coats and sand slightly with a fine sanding pad between coats. Plaster repairs will now be dry, so sand to smooth, wipe away dust and muck with a sugar soap wipe and then paint. Towards the top rear of the base cabinet on the side that your washing machine will be, drill through with a 60mm hole saw. To protect the washing machine pipes from wear and for a neater finish, I'm adding cable duct fittings to both sides of the hole. Thoroughly clean the top edge of all the cabinet panels and the support rails. Once the oil is dried on your bench top, drop into place. I found that my sink cutout intruded on the top front rail of the cabinet, so I marked, removed the bench top and used my jigsaw to create a cutout before repositioning the top. In your kit part packs you'll find these tiny angle brackets. Use those to secure your bench top in place. From underneath, evenly space 3 30mm screws through the top front rail too. If you want your tile pattern to be even on each end, which is what I want, then you need to find the centre of the area that you'll be tiling and then mark that point. Then you'll start your tiling from the centre and move outwards to the sides. The bench top and the side walls need to be protected while I'm tiling. Now I love this stuff. It's masking tape with attached pull-out drop sheets. The static in the film makes it cling to even vertical surfaces. You only need very simple products for tiling. Premix is better for the smaller jobs, and make sure you're using a wall adhesive. Glove up and use the notch trowel to apply a generous bed of tile adhesive. Only apply to small areas at a time and keep the bed a consistent thickness. Tile spaces underneath and centre that first tile, pushing firmly into the cement.
Now before we go any further, I need to clarify something about tile spaces. There's a lot of misconceptions with these little products.
They do not ever lay flat in between the tiles. If you do this, they'll be stuck there and you'll have to grout over them. That grout is then likely to crumble and fall out. The spaces need to stand upright in each join so that they can be easily removed once the cement's set. Working along and up and leaving the ends clear at this stage. Use a short level, one that crosses at least 3 tiles, to press your tiles into the bedding cement. This keeps their faces flush and consistent. Once you reach the top, just use a damp cloth to remove any tile cement that may have squeezed out from between the tiles or out the top. Measure for your end cuts, remembering there may be a difference between top and bottom, so check both. Cut your tile sections. You can use a traditional score and snap tile cutter or an angle grinder fitted with a diamond blade. If using a grinder, only ever cut outdoors and make sure you wear full PPE, hands, feet, eyes, ears and breathing protection. Allow the tile cement to dry overnight, then remove the spacers. You'll only need a small box of grout for a job of this size, and I picked grout and silicone in the same product ecosystem so that their colours match perfectly. While wearing gloves and breathing protection, mix up a suitable amount of grout, adding a little water at a time. Aim for a thick consistency that will easily hold on your grouting squeegee. Work over small sections at a time, forcing the grout into the joints. Press firmly and work along and across the joins. Once dry, use a grouting sponge and clean water to remove the excess and then finish with a clean cloth. You can now remove the drop sheeting. To the underside of the lip of the sink, add a bead of quality silicone. I used a premium quality silicone that is a sealant and adhesive. Press the sink down firmly into place and then place something heavy such as a bucket of water in the sink and leave standing at least overnight. Use a cloth moistened with methylated spirits to clean off any excess silicone. Time to add the overhead wall units. They sit right on top of the tiles. I use those same 75mm white button head cabinet screws to secure to the studs in the walls. Once secured, add the side panel onto the wall cabinet. For contrast, and so I don't interfere with the existing overhead lighting, on the right hand side I'm adding an open shelf. I need to measure for that to find the stud position before drilling the frame for the screws. Position and screw in place. I used black 50mm round head screws. As my screws protruded from the frame, I used my trim router to make a cutout on the rear of the shelf panels so that they would sit properly. Before adding the silicone seal to the edges, give the tiles a final clean down and polish with a clean cloth and clean water. Mask along the edges where you need to seal with silicone, then add a consistent bead of silicone all the way along. Very lightly spray with methylated spirits and then shape and remove excess silicone with one pass of a caulking tool. Remove the masking and allow the silicone to cure. Fit the tap and reconnect the waste outlet. It's recommended that you have a plumber inspect and finalise the reconnections before you turn any water on. When you come to measure for the kickboard for your base cabinet, remember that tiled floors in wet areas will generally have falls, so it's important that you measure at both ends. Write this down and then measure the width and cut your kickboard to suit. Use your set square to measure the distance from the front edge to the leg support plate. Adjust the square to make it 8 to 10mm shorter than the measured distance and then use it to put a pencil mark towards each end in the centre of the base panel of the cabinet. Slip the kickboard into place, making sure it's pressed firmly up against the leg bases. With the countersinking bit fitted, drill 3 holes at the marked points and then secure with 30mm screws. Clean the area around the screw holes with methylated spirits or something similar, and then use the white disc stickers that came with the cabinet to conceal the screw heads. Use the jigsaw to cut the shelf to fit around your plumbing. To ensure the shelf doesn't bow at the rear, use a couple of 65 by 18mm offcuts to make supports and screw them in place. Slip the washing machine back in, putting the hoses through the cabinet hole as soon as it's close enough. And remember the mystery hole that I put in the back left corner of my bench top? The power point for my washing machine is actually above the bench top, so I needed to be able to feed my power cord through from the bottom. Simply put a cable port in place, feed the cord through, and it's all done, neat and tidy. Now, to sort the cupboard doors out. For side-by-side doors, it's critical that the positioning of your handles is accurate, so use a set square to transfer measurements between doors and also to make sure your handle is straight. Measure for position and screw spacing and then pre-drill. Use snips to cut the screws to the appropriate length. Peel the protective film back from the section of the door where the handles will be fitted. Push the cut screws through from the back as you position the handle. You can now start to tighten the screws. Only ever hand tighten handle screws as overdriving them can damage the door face. Fitting the soft close hinges is easy. First click them apart and the larger section goes in the door itself with the arm pointing outwards. Fit the smaller part to the cabinet, screwing in through the larger oval shaped holes at the rear. Position the door and then click the two parts of the hinge back together. Check the door's alignment and then tighten the screws before adding the other two per hinge. Put the shelf in the cupboard and then you can remove the protective film from the doors. I needed to refresh the old double doors. First I removed all the hinges and bits and pieces, putting everything into a container so I didn't lose anything that I was going to need later. A razor blade scraper cleans off all the surface material and tidies up any damaged screw holes and other spots. Clean the door down with sugar soap wipes before filling any holes with a suitable sandable filler, allowing it to dry and then sanding down with fine paper. Wipe them down with a clean damp cloth to get rid of any sanding dust and then give them a couple of coats of water-based enamel. Once the paint's dried, I added a couple of new handles to the doors and then the doors can be rehung and the Euro Laundry makeover is complete.
And after this fantastic, functional and budget-friendly makeover, I won't even be embarrassed to leave the doors open to the laundry.